Professor X is dead, accidentally assassinated at the hands of his son David Haller, aka Legion, and realities the X-Men and Marvel Universe knows it will change for about 4 months. In 1995, without the Professor's dream of human and mutant integration and his plans for the X-Men, America is conquered by Apocalypse. Magneto leads a band of rebelling mutants, and all humans longing for freedom have fled to Europe. It's the Age of Apocalypse. Today I'll answer, what is the Age of Apocalypse and why did it happen? What makes this X-Men alternate reality such a successful outlier in Marvel Comics events? What's the impact and legacy of the Age of Apocalypse today? Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting. It all helps me out a great deal. This is a Krakin Krakoa episode. You can find live streams of casual Krakoas every Wednesday circa 5:15 Central Standard Time. Subscribe to the channel for your opportunity to join those. Come hang out in the chat and respond to questions. You can also find a full reading order over on comicbookherald.com for the Age of Apocalypse, which I will link in the show notes. Some mild spoilers for Discuss Comics may follow. Age of Apocalypse is one of the first comics I ever fell in love with and is ranked on Comic Book Herald as one of my 100 favorite comics of all time. I'll be honest, upon a reread for the My Marvelous Year reading club, I was delightfully surprised to find this ranking holds up, and my love for the AOA isn't purely nostalgia and the joys of discovering comics, at least not entirely. The event throws the entire X-Men universe into a reimagined dystopian Marvel U and forces enough degrees of change that heroes and villains feel at once recognizable and refreshed. I'd argue Apocalypse has never before nor since felt as menacing or effective as an archvillain, achieving the level of total success only the likes of Dr. Doom, Thanos, and Stiltman have achieved before him. Whereas in the Simonsons' late 80s X-Factor comics where the character debuted, Apocalypse is stopped by the original 5 X-Men, here the entirety of mutant and human resistance can't measure up to the strategy and forces he's deployed in raising and conquering America. The impetus and the first glimpse of hope for Magneto's X-Men to stop Apocalypse comes in the form of the time-traveling Bishop, here surviving the shift in alternate reality from Legion Quest, the standard Earth 616 prologue story where Legion tries to go back in time and kill Magneto, but accidentally kills Papa Charlie instead. To Age of Apocalypse here, where he has just enough memory, Bishop does, of the world that was to drive the AOA X-Men into a final act of desperate resistance. This sets the stage for Magneto to gather his mutant forces to make a final push to remove Apocalypse from power, retrieve the M'Kraan crystal, and restore reality to the hopeful version where Professor X still lives. The saga begins and ends with 2 event issues, X-Men Alpha and Omega from creators Scott Lobdell, Mark Waid, and Roger Cruz, but otherwise plays out across 8 titles, one replacing each ongoing X-Line title that was canceled to start 1995. You got 4 issues per title. Broadly, each series ties to the developing mutant resistance and world building of the AOA, but apart from a known endpoint in X-Men Omega, each creative roster is given the freedom to explore the world in their own way. You have Amazing X-Men, Astonishing X-Men, Weapon X, X-Men, Gambit and the Externals, Factor X, Excalibur, and Generation Next. With as many things going wrong for Marvel as there are in 1995, see also impending bankruptcy, it's honestly astonishing, amazing, Excalibur, that Age of Apocalypse hits with the level of quality that it does. The creative roster is both a sign of who'd been driving the X-line since the Image exodus of 1992, Scott Lobdell, Joe Madureira, Chris Pacello, Larry Hama, and Fabian Nicieza, and a snapshot of then up-and-coming future stars, Mark Waid, Warren Ellis, Jeff Loeb, Steve Epting, Steve Scroach, Tony Daniel, Ken Lashley. So instead of the mid-90s, Marvel feeling that the book was put together by the cleanest folks editorial could find off the streets, you have a really talented group blending confidence, hunger, ambition, and willingness to experiment with the property. Exactly the right fit for the tone and goals of the Age of Apocalypse. I do find it interesting, too, how Age of Apocalypse was semi-marketed and conceived as a reaction to DC's tremendous success a few years earlier with the death of Superman. I'd never thought of Age of Apocalypse as a death of story before, but that's clearly what Legion Quest is. It's just before death of narratives were a dime a dozen and always named as such. Nonetheless, Legion Quest could be called today the death of Professor X. Strategically, I think Age of Apocalypse is brilliant. Editors Bob Harris and Ben Robb have talked a lot about fan outcry when they announced they were canceling the entire X-line, never changed short-sighted comic nuts, centering all of their creative focus on an event of this magnitude, and it worked wonders. It's worth noting, too, that in their then 30-plus year history, Marvel Comics had never pulled a stunt like Age of Apocalypse before. Sure, there are alternate realities and events, but Marvel had never stopped publishing a whole line of comics to make room for replacement comics set in that alternate landscape. Even during 1984's Secret Wars, which gives the perception of a Marvel Universe on pause while the heroes and villains have it out on Battleworld, Marvel continued publishing all titles at their regular cadence. Given the success here, it's surprising how rarely Marvel has tried this maneuver. Examples from this point where Marvel actually canceled a line in favor of an alternate reality or event story are pretty slim. You have Hickman's 2015 Secret Wars and 2019's House of X Powers of 10 canceling out the rest of the X line at the time, right? Both wild successes as the clearest examples of a full commitment. But even events like 2005's House of M, while fully encompassing, don't straight up shut down an existing line of comics. It's a rare display of genuine commitment to a story that promises real stakes, and given Marvel's tendency to way overexploit anything potentially good, I can't get over how rarely it really happens. Now, I'm sure the real answers are pretty obvious. They always tend to rhyme with whales and bunny, which I think is another part of what makes Age of Apocalypse so exciting. It's actually a rare gamble, again, occurring right in that space where the publishing house is on fire and desperate experimentation is needed. If the 90s collector market isn't bursting, I don't know that Age of Apocalypse happens. The character redesigns and reimagining of a Marvel Universe without Professor X work wonderfully, with Joe Mad perfectly of a piece with the 95 zeitgeist to understand how this event could ooze cool from every page. Most of the designs are based around very simple changes, or purely reflect the notably darker landscape, but they effectively tell us these are not the mutants we've known despite the similarities. Wolverine, with his advanced healing factor, is somehow missing a hand. Cyclops is actually missing an eye, 3 Gisses, whose 3 claw marks that came from. Sunfire has burned off his own skin. Nightcrawler is always brandishing a sword, and Cape Pride wears attached Wolverine knife claws into battle. One thing the AOA is shockingly good at is amplifying or reconsidering established dynamics between various characters. Jean Grey and Wolverine are romantically paired superweapons. Magneto and Rogue 616 Savage Land Dalliance blooms into marriage and children, young Charles. And Mr. Sinister is more fully built as Apocalypse's right hand, with a scheme to usurp him when the time is right. All of these feel both familiar from X-Men comics history and fresh because of the new parameters of this world. The hardest pill to swallow, arguably, is simply which beloved characters join with Apocalypse or Sinister as mutants aiding his genocide. It's a necessary evil in a world this fallen, but it also means the likes of Danny Moonstar, Jamie Madrox, Sam Guthrie, Hank McCoy, and of course Scott and Alex Summers are a part of Apocalypse's monstrous machinery. Nonetheless, there's simply a cool factor to Age of Apocalypse that only 91 Claremont and Jim Lee X-Men even comes close to capturing this decade. As someone who enjoyed X2 Legends on Xbox before I started reading comics, I just assumed Apocalypse's Horsemen were always as cool as Abyss, Mikhail Rasputin, Holocaust, and Mr. Sinister. Imagine my surprise to find out they were more like Starving Young Women and Caliban. That's because treating the 4 Horsemen like name power players in their own right doesn't kick into full gear until Age of Apocalypse. Angel as Death and the Simonson's X-Factor, of course, being the exception. Likewise, AOA actually builds the mutant mythos to include Blink, previously introduced by Lobdell and Bocello during the Phalanx Covenant but killed off, and Morph, aka an animated series favorite who actually didn't exist in Earth 616, at least in this form, as part of the X-Men. Cable's also reimagined here as a young teen X-Man with staying power to make it from the Age of Apocalypse into his own long-running 90s Marvel series. Oddly enough, same goes for Holocaust, Sugarman, and Dark Beast, alternate reality characters that just couldn't quite be left out of the 616 once created. As a result, the Age of Apocalypse had real staying power. X-Man lands on Earth 616 and proceeds to star in a solo series for a mind-boggling 75 issues. Dark Beast has bounced around the X-Men universe for 25 years as well. Unsurprisingly, there have also been miniseries returning to the AOA. For 6 issues in 2005, written by all people by Marvel's now editor-in-chief C.B. Cebulski, pretending then to be the Asian creator Akira Yoshida. And in 2015 Secret Wars, there was of course an AOA Universe mini. My personal favorite resurrection occurs in the pages of the Rick Remender written Uncanny X-Force, with a significant portion of the Dark Angel saga taking place across the Age of Apocalypse, to the point that Age of Apocalypse Nightcrawler becomes a real part of the team for a good chunk of the run, with the art here in Nightcrawler v AOA Iceman battle going on via Phil Noto. It's a good run. You should check it out. Highly recommended. At the end of the day, though, Age of Apocalypse is Magneto's story. This is the world where Eric Magnus Lencher never breaks bad because his best friend Charles is killed before visions of X-Men and Brotherhoods can fully take shape. Of course, through Chris Claremont's Magneto Reclamation Project, we've seen Magneto as a leader of X-Men and headmaster of the New Mutants, but in Age of Apocalypse, he's made to play the part of Professor X every step of the way. And Magneto is a better suited leader for the savage nature of Apocalypse's America, although you could also argue he in part allowed it to happen in the first place. Nonetheless, insofar as there's a through line and core narrative, it's Magneto's sacrifice, learning from the reality-hopping Bishop that the Age of Apocalypse reality only happened because of Legion's accidental assassination, and that through the M'Kraan crystal, that reality where Professor X lived could be restored. The sacrifice is a bit tropey in alternate reality fiction, but there's weight to the sacrifice here, with Magneto giving up Rogue, his son Charlie, and of course his own life to restore Earth 616. This is one of the more underrated aspects of Age of Apocalypse, how effectively it centers the coolest villains of the X-Men universe and elevates them to their fullest potential. Apocalypse's survival of the fittest goals are taken to extremes they never could reach in Earth 616, as truly only the strong can survive in his America. Mr. Sinister's scheming knows no limits, and the genetic mastermind is pushed into his most advanced strategic games and power plays. And Magneto is given a brief respite from his 1990s return to villainy and psychic murder during Fatal's Attraction by returning to the hardened anti-hero the 616 version, developed after Uncanny 150. Magneto's been on X-Men squads before and after, but Magneto was never the head of the X-Men more than we see in Age of Apocalypse, and in these circumstances, he's a perfect fit. For the Krakoa era House of X and Powers of 10 crowd, there are a few interesting wrinkles to consider with Age of Apocalypse. The first and most obvious is whether the apocalypse of this reality shares the same history as Earth 616 Apocalypse as told post 10 of Swords. In that 2020 event, we learned Apocalypse has a wife named Genesis and kids, his original First Horseman, and that he was meant to be preparing the living on Earth as warriors to help his people battle the demon hordes of Amenth, where Genesis and company were trapped in their perpetual war. This history continues to make sense in the AOA, arguably even more so, as Apocalypse is able to take his mission of only, justifying the strongest warriors surviving to the ultimate extremes. There's a really cool what if just waiting to explore the Age of Apocalypse version of 10 of Swords through this new lens. I think it definitely adds up that it would have played out that way. The other most interesting aspect for me is whether any of Moira's mutant timeline reset abilities, and Charles and Magneto's knowledge of those abilities, carries over into this reality. Moira does play a small but notable role throughout the saga as a leader of the Human High Council and married partner of one Bolivar Trask, yes, of the Sentinel manufacturing Trask bloodline. It's hard to imagine Moira's mutant abilities are present in this multiverse, though, because I'm not sure what she'd be angling to gain out of a timeline where Apocalypse destroyed and conquered America and more or less sought to wipe out humankind. Then again, if you consider joining with Apocalypse in Life 9, maybe there's a long game at play where she bides her time and sees who comes out the strongest, then plays the odds for long-time survival. Again, as always, alternate reality Moiras are a story I would love to see more of from the Krakoa era creative teams. In the end, Age of Apocalypse is a minor miracle of right place, right time, right people, right ideas. Immediately after the Age of Apocalypse, Marvel's X-Men comics would descend into the abyss of a seemingly endless onslaught saga, the sharp edges of AOA giving way to the bloat of an overstretched idea and a failing publisher. Indeed, you can stand for whatever late 90s X-Men event you like, stand up Operation Zero Tolerance heads, but it wouldn't really be another 6 years after the AOA until X-Men felt this fresh and driven with purpose, and that was through the Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely launch of New X-Men. In an era known for excess and ham-fisted edginess, Age of Apocalypse managed to answer one of the biggest questions in X-Men with relative precision. What is the value of Professor X's dream? What would the world be like without that hope for peaceful coexistence? All you have to do is visit the Wastelands of Apocalypse to find out. Thanks for listening, everybody. Comic Book Herald is supported via patreon.com/Comic Book Herald. Thanks in particular to those of you backing in the mysterious benefactors tier. Thank you, Jesse W., Megan Getman, Cole Weathers, Professor X3769, Richard Renz, Adam, Chris McVicka, Tara Nort, Pinball Drew, Mike Solomons, Matt Mahoney, Joshua Bentley, and Alma. I'm Dave. You can find my stuff at comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald on social, Twitter, and Instagram. Look for the best comics ever in My Marvelous Year podcast for more from me. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.